Okay, so we're continuing section P6. I didn't put that at the top, but it's P6 continued. We're going to add and subtract. So that first statement is just reminding you that to add and subtract fractions, you need common denominators. So in the little greenish bluish box, there's some steps on finding a least common denominator. And underneath that, there's steps on adding and subtracting rational expressions. So what we really need to make sure we understand is that you are going to have common denominators. So if they don't already exist, you have to create them. And then we have to adjust things. So just making sure that you remember what happens with fractions. If I have 2 over, let's say, 15, and I want to add to that 3/10. Alright, so what I know is that 10 and 15 can both be made a 30. So, to change 15 to 30, I had to times 2, so I've got to times 2 up here. So I don't magically change this and not change the numerator. If I change the denominator, I've got to adjust the numerator accordingly. Here we're going to times 3. So we get 3 times 3 is 9. Okay, sorry, somebody knocked on the door. I probably put this in the wrong place, didn't I? You did 10 times 3, so then you're going to have to do 3 times 3, and that's where the 9 comes from. And then you can keep that denominator and combine the numerator. So 9 plus 4 is 13. All right, so we're going to use that same concept. Our problems are just going to be uglier than that. All right, so here we go. Number 9 and number 10, you already have like denominators. So there's no like extra work, but you do have to think at the end a little more than a regular fraction problem. All right, so you have common denominators. So you're going to keep that common denominator and you're going to combine my terms across the top. So with subtraction, remember that subtraction is adding the opposites. So if I have x minus 3x, that's negative 2x. And then this becomes a negative 2. Alright, so now if you look at this numerator, you can take a negative 2 out as a GCF and have x plus 1 left. And that's helpful because the denominator is x plus 1. So those can divide off, and you really just have negative 2 as your answer. Alright, so our next problem, again, the same denominator, so write it down. And we're going to combine like terms across the numerator. In this case, it's addition, so we can just combine like terms. So 4x and 2x is 6x, and 3 plus 5 is 8. Alright, so then, if you look at your numerator, I believe those are both divisible by 2. And if I pull that 2 out, my denominator and this parenthesis match, so they divide off. And again, this one is equal to 2. They were not all equal to. I just somehow managed to randomly pick 2 problems if that worked out. Alright, so for the next 4 problems, we do not have common denominators. Alright, so number 11, you have 2 simple denominators, and they are not the same. So your common denominator is just the 2 of them. So our common denominator is x plus 2, x minus 1. Alright, well I have to write down 2 fractions on these because I've got to adjust the numerators before I can combine them. Alright, so I feel like my button is stuck or something. I don't know why it says shift. I really apologize if that's bothering you. Alright, so this denominator had an x plus 2, and I'm giving it an x minus 1 so that I have matching denominators. So if I give it an x minus 1 on bottom, I have to do the same on top. Alright, here it was x minus 1, I gave it an x plus 2, so I have to give an x plus 2 on the top. Alright, so to save some space and some time, I'm going to go ahead and say I'm going to combine these, but I can't combine them until I have distributed. So I'm going to go back up here, and I'm going to distribute and say that I know this is 3x minus 3. I'm going to distribute here and say I know this is 5x plus 10. So when I get this numerator right here, I'm going to combine these with y's where I've done the multiply. So I have 8x and minus 3 plus 10 is going to be 7. Alright, so this has no common factor. I am done. Alright, so for the next one, you have two different denominators, but they're not both like basic. This one will factor. So we're going to have to factor this denominator. We're going to use this factored form instead of him because it's easier to get a common denominator when you know the factors of what you're dealing with. Alright, so my common denominator has to be everything in the first one and anything new in the second one. So if I write down the first denominator, and then I'll look at the second denominator. I've already written this, so I don't have to write it again. So my common denominator is x plus 3, x plus 4. Alright, this first fraction, I didn't change his denominator, so his numerator stays 2. For the second one, I gave him an x plus 3 to make him match, so I have to give his numerator an x plus 3. Alright, so again, our next step, we're going to keep our common denominator and combine like terms on top. So make sure that you do any multiplication in your numerator that's there. Then you can combine your like terms. Then look to see if you can factor that numerator and cancel with the denominator, but in this case, 7 and 24 don't have anything in common. Okay, 2 more. Here we go. So for number 13, both of these denominators can be factored. So that's my first step. We're going to write this as x minus 5, x minus 5. And we're going to write this as 2 times x minus 5, taking out that GCF. Alright, so now, again, to get your common denominator, everything in the first one, and anything in the second one that's new. So x minus 5 is already here, but the 2 is new, so we're going to grab him. So then this is going to have the same denominator because we're making common denominators. Alright, so now we have to adjust. So this denominator to this denominator, we gained a 2. So the numerator has to gain a 2. From this denominator to this denominator, we gained another minus x minus 5. So this x minus 4 has to multiply by this x minus 5. I always put this guy in parentheses if he has more than one piece, so you don't forget to distribute all the pieces. Alright, so our common denominator is 2. And you have x minus 5 twice, so if you want to save a little bit of writing, you can write it as that thing squared. Alright, so let's go do our multiplication. This is going to give me 2x. This is going to give me x squared minus 5x minus 4x, so minus 9x, and then plus 20. Alright, so again, it was x squared, and then I got minus 5x minus 4x, that gave me minus 9x, and then this gives me positive 20. Alright, the other thing that I have to keep in mind on this problem is that we have subtraction. So if I change the subtraction to plus, this becomes negative, this becomes positive, this becomes negative. So when I go to combine my like terms, I have a negative x squared, positive 9 plus 2 is 11x, and then a minus 20. And then we are done there because this is not going to factor. Okay, last problem. So, this denominator will factor, guess and check, x minus 3, x minus 3. This is going to factor as a difference of squares, so x plus 3, x minus 3. So, our common denominator, we have x minus 3 in the first one. The second one has an x minus 3 that we don't have to write again, and then an x plus 3. So write that down twice. Whoa. Alright, so here we gained an x plus 3. So we gain an x plus 3 on top. Here we gained an x minus 3, so we gain an x minus 3 on top. Alright, common denominator. Again, you have x minus 3 in there twice, so you can write it as squared. I don't care whether you do or not. Some people like to because it saves some time. Alright, so now, doing my multiplication, this is 3x plus 9. This is 7x minus 21. Combining like terms, you're going to get 10x and negative 12. Now this will factor, but if I try to take a 2 out of that, I'm not going to be left with a plain old x, so nothing's going to cancel. So there's no point in taking the time to do that. But always check and see if that numerator will factor and if something will cancel. If you can do that mentally, great. If not, if you need to write it down, that's fine too. Alright, so that's it for today. We're not going to worry about complex fractions. That's the other thing that's in this lesson. So on your adding and subtracting, find your common denominators, adjust your numerators to make it legal, combine your numerators, put it over your common denominator. Remember, with adding and subtracting, we cannot cancel like factors until the very, very end. Otherwise, we're working ourselves in circles. Let me know if you need some help. I'm always here, happy to help.